You bring up the blazing car case anytime, anywhere. Mention Alfred Arthur Rouse. You'll find that he's remembered. Rouse? Oh yes, Rouse. He got a good run for his money. Hanged himself, though, serve him right, in the witness box. That's what people say. But I don't know. The showing Rouse made in the box, it hanged him. But I don't think he was altogether responsible for that. He contributed. No one's hanged that way without contributing. All the same, Rouse wasn't a fool. He was a cunning customer. And my own feeling is that, with many who might have cross-examined him, he might well have steered clear. He might have dodged his just deserts. What sealed his fate was the man that he came up against. Mr. Norman Birkett for the prosecution. Doesn't sound quite right, doesn't sound familiar, does it? We think of Birkett, don't we, as the great defender. And it's true, I do know this, he was never keen on prosecuting. He wouldn't ever choose the role of counsel for the Crown. But Birkett had strong professional ideals. With him, it wasn't just a matter of his likes and dislikes, but of what he deemed to be consistent with his duty. And he certainly didn't deem it consistent with his duty to decline as a fixed rule ever to appear on behalf of all citizens, instead of on behalf of one. He could always say no. He often did say no. But he felt an obligation sometimes to say yes. It was bad luck for the accused. He said yes in the case of Rouse. Bad luck in a way, of course, but don't misunderstand. If in one sense it was bad luck having Birkett prosecute you, in another sense, an important sense, it was good luck too. Inevitably his questioning would be closer than the next man's. His speeches would be more impressive and more telling. You could count on that. But you could also count on something else. Fairness. Absolute fairness. Not merely a superficial fairness of the tongue, rattling off the stock prosecuting phrases. I acknowledge the onus rests on me, members of the jury. It's for me to satisfy you beyond reasonable doubt. Birkett had a fundamental fairness, a fairness of the heart. Never a false point, never a crafty piece of tactics, never a specious argument used against the prisoner. Birkett wasn't a soft prosecutor. He didn't suffer judgment by default, as Rouse was to discover. But if there was even the faintest possibility that something he could say, some witness he could call, might produce bias, might create a prejudice, that witness wasn't called. That something wasn't said. Rouse was to discover this side of him as well. The Rouse story now. It's simple enough in its outline. Simple as can be where it isn't in dispute. Rouse was a commercial traveller in his middle 30s. Very partial to women. Boasted of his harem. A harem which was widely scattered all over the land. Talk about sailors and a wife in every port. There weren't many places Rouse went to, and he went to plenty, where he hadn't got some feminine attachment. That November 1930, he was already paying for at least 2 illegitimate children. A third had just arrived, and a fourth was on its way. As Rouse had also to maintain a lawful wife, you can imagine the strain there was upon his slender income. Basic plus commission, barely $500 a year. All right, that's the background. Come to the event. On the evening of the 5th November, that's right, Guy Fawkes night, Rouse set off from London in his car. He headed north. Somewhere en route, he picked up a man who must have been a vagrant. Must have been, for no one was to miss him when he'd gone. Rouse's objective, so he said in court, was Leicester. The vagrant seems to have been indifferent, didn't care, happy to have any sort of lift in that direction. Anyway, they drove along together. A policeman, calling attention to their lights, saw them for a minute or so on Watling Street at Markyate. They drove along together, drove on into the night. You don't get a view of them again until 2 o'clock next morning. 2 o'clock in Hardingstone Lane, leading to Hardingstone Village, off the main London road it is, a few miles from Northampton. By then there's a most almighty holocaust. Rouse's car, drawn up by its near-side verge, is one fierce sheet of flame shooting to high heaven. Rouse's passenger, trapped inside, is being burnt to ashes. Rouse himself, Rouse is walking off, walking away. Actually seen he is, most unexpectedly, by 2 young chaps coming back late from a dance, walking towards the main road where he'll thumb a lift to London, drop briefly in on his startled wife, go down early to the Thames embankment, and take a coach to the home of a girlfriend living in Glamorgan. Not saying a word about the blaze and about the man inside, just that he's without a car, that his car's been pinched. And that only to those he happens to meet. He doesn't tell the police. Rouse stays in Glamorgan overnight, no more. The following day the paper has a picture of his burnt-out car, a mention of his name, and, worse, a reference to his wife. His girlfriend and her relatives don't know that he's married. So it's back again by coach from Cardiff, back again to London, where the police are waiting for him as the coach draws up at Hammersmith. All that in essentials, in substance, it's agreed. But the battle's joined upon the question, how did it start, that fire? This is how, Rouse said to them. I'll tell you how it happened. I must have taken a wrong turning. That's how I got on the side road. Nice quiet spot, though, just right for 40 winks. I stopped with that idea, but I first of all got out. Nature's call. I told the man I'd be right back and told him, the petrol's a bit low. Fill up from the spare can while I'm gone. He asked for a smoke. I gave him one. He'd got a match, he said. I went off then some distance down the road into the hedge. Suddenly it all went light, all over the place. I thought it was headlights coming. Turned round, and I saw my car in flames. Can you imagine? I was terrified. Ran towards it, near as I could get. Doors were shut, couldn't see inside. I lost my head, I know it now, I lost my head. My main thought was to get away from that horror. Put it behind me, try to forget that dreadful accident. To which they answered, accident my foot. Rouse, they said, you planned this. It was your design, this business. You had every stage of it mapped out in your head. Very smart to pick a victim without family or friends. Very smart to pick the one night in the year when the glow of a bonfire would be a commonplace. You deliberately set that car alight and burnt that man to death, hoping we'd all assume that the remains, the unrecognizable remains, were yours. As indeed we might have done if those 2 young chaps hadn't dished the plot by coming along the road when everybody else had long since been in bed. But for them, you wouldn't have gone to London or Glamorgan, would you? You would have carried out your original project, wouldn't you? You'd have pretended you'd been burnt to death. You'd have tried to disappear. It was only on those terms that such a murder could make sense, that Rouse did want to pass off the body as his own. But why should he want to do that? Obvious, if you knew him. If you knew his character. If you knew his history. The harem was no longer a pleasure. It had got out of hand. So many demanding women, so many dependent children, so many affiliation orders, so many hungry mouths. He couldn't keep pace, he couldn't cope with it any more. If ever a man had good reason to change identity, to wipe the slate clean, to start off life afresh, That man was Alfred Arthur Rouse on the Guy Fawkes night of 1930 when his car took fire. The prosecution laid great emphasis on this at the preliminary proceedings before the magistrates. The girlfriends were called, the illegitimate children listed, the sexual anarchy of Rouse's life revealed. It explained, of course, what otherwise was almost inexplicable. It furnished a motive for what otherwise looked motiveless. Prosecutions aren't required to prove a motive, that's quite right, and often you can leave a jury to surmise one. But murder a total stranger? For no financial gain? What wild surmise could anyone dream up to cover that? Without the harem evidence, no doubt at all about it, the Crown would be in a much less strong position at assize. Nonetheless, they came to assize without the harem evidence. Before Rouse's trial began, it had been dropped. Dropped because Burkitt, now briefed as Crown leader, dropped because Burkitt said it ought to be. He had carefully studied the material. He had particularly pondered the harem evidence. He gave it anxious and prolonged consideration. Those are the words that he later used himself. He knew the value of that evidence, to him as prosecutor. He knew the danger of it, to Rouse as prisoner. Showing motive, good enough, no complaining about that. But what about Rouse's record? What about the indication of his moral shortcomings? The very things that juries shouldn't be informed of when they're trying a man, especially for his life. But motive and record, they were inextricable. Therefore motive, Burkitt decided, motive would have to go. That cut the ground, part of the ground, from under his own feet. He couldn't be specific as he might have been in opening to the jury on that theme. The springs of human conduct, he said to them, are many times beyond all human divining, and are hidden far from that region where the human eye can see or the human mind can extend. Beautifully phrased, but deliberately vague. Had to be. It was as far as he could go. That was the price he paid, the price he readily paid, for leaning over backwards in his efforts to be fair. He couldn't altogether accomplish his objective. He couldn't shut out Rouse's past completely as he wished. The magistrates' court hearings had been lavishly reported, and how many were there who had not read those reports? That was unfortunate, but it wasn't Burkitt's fault. Whatever could be done to safeguard Rouse's rights, he did. The spearhead of the Crown case was scientific testimony that the fire was designed, not accidental. This testimony involved a lot of technical expressions: petrol union joint, flywheel casing, oil gauge nut, exhaust manifold, and it drew from the defense scientific counter-testimony that the fire was accidental, not designed. Some motoring enthusiasts would be at home with this, but I confess it all sounds double-Dutch to me. I don't know a carburettor from a sparking plug, and I just wouldn't hang a man. I wouldn't take the risk on engineering theory, on expert reconstruction. Nor would many others, and some of them, it's a rational bet, were sitting on that jury. The crucial test for them was not mechanical, but human. The test was Rouse himself. Rouse and his own conduct as he described it in the box. Could it be consistent with his innocence? That is why the crisis at the trial was classical. It came where dramatic convention would dictate. It came when Norman Burkitt rose up in his place, and he and the prisoner took each other's measure. Rouse's story, don't forget, was not implausible, not by any means a strain upon belief. People do give lifts to people. People do get calls of nature. People are careless with matches. People, faced with sudden disaster, people do lose their heads, and they sometimes do tell lies as a result. There was nothing in Rouse's story to stop the average juryman saying, "There but for the grace of God go I." All depends now on how that story fares under the searching probe of Burkitt's cross-examination of the prisoner. It's a long cross-examination, but never a wasted word. The stream of pointed questions maintains a steady pressure, a pressure which keeps Rouse in continual retreat. And 4 times at least that pressure comes to flashpoint. And then the dark recesses of Rouse's mind are lit up with all the shock effect and vividness of lightning. The first one springs from his failure to communicate with the police. He had intended going to Scotland Yard, Rouse says, as soon as he got back from Cardiff on that coach, but the police had anticipated him. "Were you surprised," says Burkitt, "when the police asked you to get out of the coach?" "Well, I was in a way," says Rouse. "You knew what they wanted?" "It was obvious from the press that they wanted me, and I was going down to see them." Burkitt glances for a moment at his papers. "Did you say in your first words to them, 'I'm glad it is all over'?" "I did say words to that effect." "You had had abundant opportunities to get it over at a police station at Cardiff." "I have very little confidence," says Rouse, "in local police stations." "You know that in a place like Cardiff there is a police headquarters, don't you?" Rouse fences. "I don't know about Cardiff." "You're not saying to the jury that you did not know that in a place like Cardiff there would be a big police station?" "Yes, there was." "But you would not go to the provincial police because you don't trust the provincial police." "If you want my candid opinion," says Rouse, "I haven't much faith in them." Burkitt again glances at his papers. "Did you also say in your first words to the police, 'I am responsible'?" "I said words to that effect." "But you were not responsible." "Yes, it was my car." "You were not, as I understand your answers here today, responsible in the smallest degree." "In police eyes, the owner of a car is responsible for anything that happens to that car." "Responsible for the death of a man with which you had nothing to do?" "I wasn't referring to the burning of a man." 43 hours after the event, why should you not say, "I can give you a perfect explanation, and I want to do it"? "Ah," says Rouse, "you've had time to think of those words." "So had you," said Burkitt, and there is a tremor as the implication breaks upon the court. The second flashpoint is reached a few minutes later. Burkitt has started on the events of Guy Fawkes night and wants to know why Rouse elected to drive through the night at all. "Your business in Leicester on the 6th would have done any time during the day?" "No," Rouse says. It wouldn't. The principal thing was to get some money from your firm. The principal thing I was going up for was money. You could have got money there at any time during the day. Rouse affects amusement. Then you know more about the firm than I do. Couldn't you have got that money at any time during that day? No, it has to be sanctioned by the heads of the firm. Does it take them a day to do it? No, but they have to be there to do it. Supposing you had gone to get it at noon, couldn't it have been done? If they'd been there, I'd been there before and been too late, and that's why I went. Travelled through the night in order to get there in good time to see the heads of the firm to get money. Yes. That was the only reason. Yes. Burkitt is watching the witness narrowly. Have you ever done it before? To get money? In the night? Once before, twice before. When? I can't give the dates. When? I can't remember. When did you make up your mind to take this journey? I can't remember. Was it a sudden decision? No, I don't think it was sudden. You had not written to Leicester to say, I will be there. No. So far as they were concerned, you would be quite unheralded. Yes. The heads of the firm, whom it was so necessary for you to see, might have been away. Rouse is cornered, and he knows it. Yes, he says, that's true. I said Rouse's mind gets lit as if with lightning, didn't I? And I wasn't far wrong, was I? Driving by night to get the money. No, it doesn't wash. And that journey north now looks far more sinister. For if the reason that he gave has been exploded, what is the reason that he didn't dare to give? The lightning shoots again. Again you see into his mind. Only that white flicker. But it's enough. You see into his mind, you see the secrets he's hoarding when Burkitt approaches the events after the fire. Do you realize that the first thing you ought to have done was to try to get the man out? Rouse thinks it over. I realize it now. Did you not realize it then? I couldn't get near the car. Did you not realize that the thing to do, if possible, was to get the man out? I couldn't get near the car. You told us you went past the car. I went some distance past. Towards the village? Yes. Were you going to the village for help? I expect I was. Why didn't you continue? I got panicky. Rouse has nailed his colours to the mast. Panic, panic, panic. That explains everything. But does it? We shall see. Why did you get panicky? Asks Burkitt. It was my car. But you had nothing to do with it. It was my car, and I thought there was a man inside. Did you think you would be blamed? No. What were you panicking about? Rouse's answer isn't an answer, not if you look at it closely. I considered I had every reason to be panicking. I admit I was panicking. Of what? Burkitt brings him back to the question put. Of what? The blaze. Do you mean that the mere blaze frightened you? Yes, and I thought the man was inside. Was not that all the more reason why you should try and help, or get help? Yes. You went to get help. Yes. Why did you stop? I lost my head. But why did you lose your head? Do you mean you thought you would be blamed? Rouse gives it up. I don't know why I lost my head. The panic excuse is wearing thin. Birkett wears it thinner. You saw those two young men coming up the road. I saw them, yes. Didn't you think, now, I'll tell them and get them to help? Rouse takes a breather, doesn't answer. Didn't you think I'll tell them and get them to help? I ran towards them to get help, that was my first thought. But you didn't get help. No. You first thought of going to them for help, and then you decided not to. Yes. You knew that in the flames of that car, that companion of yours was being burnt to a cinder. I thought so, yes. Why did you not ask them for help? I was in a panic. Back to that threadbare getaway, threadbare now. I was in a panic. Of what? What were you frightened of? I was afraid. Of what? I was in a panic. I was terrified. Rouse would like to call it a day, but Birkett hasn't finished. On the main road you got a lift in a lorry. Yes. Did you ask for that lift? Yes. You weren't in such a panic that you didn't remember to do that. My one idea, says Rouse, was to get as far back as I could, to get away to London. For what reason? I wanted to get away from that. Why? It was horrible. No doubt it was. Birkett looks up sharply. No doubt it was. But you were not responsible for it. No, I wasn't responsible for it. Why could you not there and then go to Hardingstone, to the village police, go to the Northampton police, to get the facts before them? Why did you not do that? I didn't, says Rouse. Very well. No point in carrying that further. You asked for a lift. Did you give an explanation that you had been waiting for a friend with a car who had not turned up? It's quite possible I did. Birkett pauses. Do you want to tell the jury that your mind was a blank? No, I don't remember the words I used. What explanation did you give? It was not the truth. You were sufficiently out of the panic to invent a lie. Rouse is shifting, physically shifting as he stands there. Put it that way, he says. That is right, is it not? Yes. Were you with the lorry man 4 hours? Yes. Do you remember what you talked about? Mostly the defects of that lorry. Does that look like panic? Rouse shifts again. I don't know. Does that look like panic? It doesn't, perhaps. The third flashpoint has done its devastating work. The fourth is unexpected. Unexpected because all of us have been taking for granted, haven't we, the presence of that spare can of petrol in the car. How long did you have that can in the car? I hadn't got it in the morning, Rouse concedes. I don't carry it ordinarily. Why did you put it in? I was going a long journey in the night. You had abundant opportunity to fill up for the night journey. Yes, but I already had 4 gallons in my 5-gallon tank. You could easily have had it filled up before you started. Yes, but I never buy 1 gallon. Why not? I don't like tendering half a crown. Half a crown, yes, motorists remember this was 1930. Are you seriously saying you have a disinclination to buy a small quantity because you don't like tendering the money? I don't think it's worth having 1 gallon. It is preferable to fill your tank from a wayside pump than from a can. Rouse can hardly repudiate that. It's common sense. The can in the car, like the night drive itself, it's now taken on the semblance of a pointer, an unmistakable, unescapable sign of Rouse's guilt. It need not have been there. It need not have been used. You had travelled about 60 miles to Hardingstone. I don't know the distance. I take that as correct. 60 miles, about 2 gallons of petrol? Yes. You would have 2 gallons left. The simplest of arithmetic, but Rouse is unwilling to face up to its significance. Let me work that out, he says. 2 gallons used upon the journey leaves 2 gallons in the tank. 2 and 2 do make 4, there's no disputing. Rouse, back right against the wall, can only give assent. Burkitt's next question echoes like the crack of doom. There was no need to fill up at all then, was there? Rouse had stepped into the box with chances you might rate on the situation at that time as 50-50. He stepped out again with his chances virtually nil. Yes, it's quite legitimate to say, I don't deny it, that Norman Burkitt cross-examined him to his death. That, however, puts us, every one of us, in Norman Burkitt's debt, and it reflects lustre on him as an instrument of justice. Justice, after all, is not a one-way traffic. It's not a sentimental haze of victorious defences. It's equally served by a just conviction as by a just acquittal. And Rouse, on his own subsequent confession, Rouse was a cold-blooded, callous murderer.